6 decades ago, in a highly secretive, logistically complex, and profoundly important mission, 4 undercover Israeli operatives seized one of the world's most wanted criminals in the dead of night on a quiet street in Argentina. The year was 1960, and their captive was Adolf Eichmann, responsible for orchestrating the transportation of Europe's Jews to the ghettos and the camps. One of the highest-ranking members of the Third Reich, he was charged with crimes against humanity and put on trial in Jerusalem for the world to see. And the international press coverage was comprehensive and unprecedented. All over the world, pages and pages were dedicated to disseminating the hours of harrowing testimony. But of all the extraordinary reporting that emerged from that court, journalism's most lasting contribution was a single 4-word phrase coined by columnist for The New Yorker. Her name was Hannah Arendt, and her phrase was the banality of evil. Sitting for 4 months amid the countless rows of correspondents, diplomats, and observers, she covered the Eichmann trial from start to finish, and she confessed that the thing which perplexed her most about the entire episode was Eichmann's absolute mediocrity. Knowing that he had directed deportations, led liquidations, and advanced the extermination of an entire race, she had expected the man at the defense bench to seem like a demonic, diabolical, monstrous creature. She had expected to see a savage villain to match the evil reputation that preceded him. But sitting quietly behind bulletproof glass, he appeared simply as an inconspicuous bureaucrat, unexceptional and unremarkable in every way. And it was this nondescript presence that led her to invent the expression, the banality of evil, along with the idea that while we may expect brutal atrocities to be carried out by malformed fiends, crimes against humanity can be committed almost casually by otherwise ordinary people. And as the horrors of last week have come to light, many questions have come to the fore, but perhaps the one question that has occupied the minds of every civilized person on earth has been not theological, how could God let this happen, but anthropological. How could people do this? How could human beings be so inhumane? How could human beings be so depraved and perpetrate such outrageous barbarity? And the answer to that question is, from my perspective, regrettably simple. There is nothing in human nature that makes us humane. There is nothing in our DNA that teaches us that every single person on earth deserves care and attention and sympathy and dignity. We are all, as creatures, moral blank slates, motivated at our core by a sequence of what one notorious biologist has called selfish genes, driven by the impulse to survive. Our most primal instincts are egocentric and self-absorbed, narcissistic, and oblivious to any call for sacrifice or philanthropy. Now, by now, many of you know that despite my British sensibilities, I am in a state of almost constant awe of the founders and framers of this nation and its laws, despite all their flaws. But there are 2 words in the American Declaration of Independence to which I take exception. Speaking of the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, Thomas Jefferson wrote that we hold these truths to be self-evident. But they are not self-evident. The idea that every single human being has a right to life is not self-evident. It needs to be taught. The idea that every single human being has a right to liberty is not self-evident. It needs to be taught. The idea that every single human being has a right to seek meaning and pursue happiness is not self-evident. It needs to be taught. What we call morality is not innate. It does not originate in our brains. It needs to be taught. And that is where our story begins today, with the opening pages of Genesis. Standing at the summit of Mount Sinai, a single prophet and leader of slaves was instructed to inscribe a groundbreaking phrase as the culmination of the very first chapter of the Jewish Constitution. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo. God created humanity in his image. Standing at the foot of Sinai, we were told that at the dawn of time, God pierced the darkness with light and filled the void with life. And then we were taught a vital truth that was anything but self-evident, that every single human being is a vessel of divinity. When we were born as a nation, we were taught a moral truth that had evaded civilization for millennia, a moral truth that had escaped the potentates and the populations of Egypt and Greece and Mesopotamia, smothered beneath the weight of selfish genes, and egomania, the moral truth that every single human being, no matter their rank or their stature, is worthy of care and compassion and respect and dignity. It is not natural or self-evident to treat every human being with deference and esteem. It is not natural for our appetites to surrender before the call of moral responsibility, which is why the revelation at Sinai erupted as a revolution in the affairs of humankind. Hitler was not wrong when he said conscience is a Jewish invention, because it is not human nature to be humane. But the foundation of Jewish faith, it is a creed that was bequeathed to us so that we could share it with humanity. And it is not accidental that in an ordinary year after we read the first pages of Genesis, our sages direct us to a passage in Isaiah when he says, Karaticha, I summon you, L'or Goyim, to be a light unto the nations. God filled the world with light, but he needs us to spread it. The reason that we are willing to pay so high a price for tuition is not simply so that our kids' friends have kosher homes, but because we know that the moral code invoked at Sinai is not innate and needs to be taught. That is why the attempt at impartiality or neutrality on the part of elite university administrations all over the nation is not only tragic, but dangerous. It is not human nature to be humane. Ethics are not innate. And if institutions of higher learning aspire to be more than merely way stations of information, they ought to train their students not only to process data or articulate different views, but to choose a moral frame. The idea that free speech will inexorably lead to moral clarity and the unwavering devotion to the sanctity of humanity is completely misconceived. So while they ought to permit free speech, they ought to brand not only Hamas, but any defense of Hamas for what it has been revealed to be: evil, depraved, and inhumane. There are competing ideologies out there where the weak are to be culled and the old are to be killed and the other is to be exterminated. And silence or neutrality gives them space to grow. At the end of his tenure, as a final reminder to our ancestors, Moses said, Hachayim v'hamavet natati lefanecha. Life and death I lay before you. V'acharta b'chayim. Choose life. We are now in a war against human beings who promote an inhumane ideology, whose teachings and ideas and barbarity threaten our brothers and sisters and the rest of humanity. This is a war to secure Israel's borders, but more than that, it is to combat a cult that incites violence, creates carnage, and celebrates death. We can no longer turn the other cheek because we have a duty to protect the weak and counter the malignant creed which teems beneath the streets of Gaza and breeds moral depravity. Tragically, this war will require soldiers to kill. But in the words of John Stuart Mill, war is an ugly thing, but it is not the ugliest. Uglier still is the belief that there is nothing worth fighting for. He continues, as long as justice and injustice continue to fight for ascendancy in the affairs of humankind, people must be willing when need be to do battle for one against the other. Evil can be banal because goodness needs to be taught. Cruelty can be casual. Inhumanity can become natural, and what we see as unfathomable and incomprehensible can come to pass if we do not do our part to instill human hearts with compassion. Ronald Reagan once said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We do not pass it on to our children in the bloodstream." He said it must be fought for, protected, and handed on to them to do the same, or we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like when people were free. The idea, first taught on the summit of Sinai to a single prophet and a small band of slaves, has been disseminated by multiple faiths across the ages over the face of the earth so successfully that we now take it to be self-evident. But our summons to spread light is not yet complete, as long as other ideologies still compete for believers, as long as evil or moral ambiguity still breeds unabated. We have an obligation to stand up and speak out and give voice to heaven's vision for humanity, where everyone, including the weak and the old and the other, have a divine spark and a right to life, liberty, and dignity. Next time we see a young person, let us remember that compassion and care and attention are not self-evident, and it falls to us to gently educate, to effectively teach them that every single human being has a right to life and liberty and dignity. May this week bring us closer to true peace as we try to sow the seeds of redemption. I wish you all a Shavua Tov.